Ghost Train, Chapter 2. Georgy, Nemov. Started like a poem by Kornei Chukovsky. My phone rang. It was an informant named Slon. He told me that he saw Pasha Cherep enter a grocery store near the 604-kilometer platform. Pavel Cherpanov, aka Pasha Cherep, is in the development of our operational department, and I have long wanted to talk to him about the robbery of the house on Naberezhnaya 17. But Pasha has been hiding from me for over a month. In 10 minutes, Kostya and I parked near this very store on the very edge of the city, near the dacha village, Rasvit. The cold winter evening was getting colder. Kostya, you stay outside, and I'll go into the store. I commanded and stepped towards the entrance. At that moment, Skull came out of the store door. I hoped that, in the darkness, he wouldn't recognize me, and silently went to meet him. Kostya stood by the car so as not to scare him away. Skull stopped in the doorway, glanced at me, and sprinted toward the wooded area. "Hold on, Skull. We need to talk," I shouted, trying to keep up. Skull dived into the thicket. I followed him. There was a narrow path. "Hold on, I'll shoot." I decided to take the fright. Skull gave a sharp left and ran to the platform. It was hard to run. It was winter, slippery and dark, but I managed to close the gap. Somewhere behind me, I heard Kostya's heavy footsteps. At the deserted platform stood an electric train, dark somehow, with its doors open. A dim lantern picked out a couple of carriages from the darkness. Skull ran as hard as he could toward it. There were 3 feet between us, no more than 3 feet, when he ducked through the dark doorway and ran through the cars toward the tail. I jumped into the vestibule and started holding the doors, looking back along the train in case he decided to jump out of another car at the last moment. Kostya was hopelessly behind. The doors hissed shut. The Skull stayed inside, and I let go of my door, which immediately slammed shut. Through the glass of the door, I saw Kostik run to the car. He was a seasoned operative, and he would be bringing up the patrolman at the next station to meet us there. All I had to do was methodically comb through the last few cars and put the bracelets on Pasha. He's got nowhere to go. The train started. An attempt to call Kostya was unsuccessful. The phone cut off all connection at once. Swearing, I stepped into the half-dark carriage. Not a soul inside. In the next one, the same picture. I reached the middle and heard a hoarse scream, mixed with swearing. The vestibule doors swing open, and Pasha runs straight to me. He's screaming, his eyes bulging. Well, I think he's going for the gun. He's got some kind of trick. I put him on the floor and put on the bracelets. "Commander, let's get out of here. He's coming this way. He's gonna kill us." Skull kept yelling. His fright was so believable that I grabbed my holster. "Stay down. Don't move." I pinned him to the floor with my knee. Then the doors of the vestibule opened, and it began to squeeze into the car. First, a huge, scarred head with sewn eyelids appeared out of the darkness. Then slowly, as if in a dream, the rest of the car squeezed in. The mutant was enormous, muttering something to itself as it moved toward us. I was numb from what I saw. Goosebumps the size of my fist ran down my back. "Whale him!" Skull, pinned to the floor, roared as hard as he could. His shout brought me out of my stupor, and I grabbed my pistol and fired a clip at the goblin. He screamed so loud that Skull and I almost went deaf, and then he ripped out the nearest seat and threw it in our direction. I threw myself on the floor. The heavy projectile flew over us and blew out a couple of windows. I didn't need any more coaxing. I helped Skull up, and we ran as fast as we could out of that wagon. We ran for maybe 5 cars, and we could still hear the mutant's horrible screams behind us. Then the thought of pulling the stopcock flashed through my mind. I rushed to the lever. It's off. The next cars are the same. No people, but the stopcocks are off. I can't take it anymore. Pasha wheezed, falling in exhaustion on one of the seats of the next car. I, too, was exhausted and collapsed on a neighboring sofa. The electric train, cutting through the darkness, flew like a huge arrow. which was released by some mythical demon. To the right and left was a forest. Above it hung a huge moon. Two men lay in the semi-darkness of the carriage, completely unaware of what was happening. I remembered, Commander. Heavily breathing began to broadcast Skull. When I trampled the zone, we had a blabbermouth in the squad, liked to tell stories. So he told us about some ghost train. His buddy's daddy got on one once. It snatches people into a parallel world. And there's a conductor on it, a huge mutant. We didn't believe him at the time, but now I don't know what to think. Now I'm gonna press the emergency button. I started. It's useless. Neither buttons nor stopcocks work here. Pasha interrupted me. I decided to check and pressed it. There was a noise and a nasty grinding noise from the speaker. Listen, we ran 10 or 15 cars with you. Such long trains do not happen. There should already be a locomotive and there are drivers. I continued. There is no locomotive and drivers in it. Cut off Skull. How is that? I wondered. And just like that, it is beginningless. Even 1,000 cars pass, the beginning will not find. Come on, it doesn't work like that. And you and me, Commander, will check this fact. We'll check it. Because the conductor drives us from behind, so now we have to go forward all the time. I realized that something strange was happening around, but I couldn't believe Skull's words. My thoughts were jumbled in my head, and I took out my phone again. There was still no connection. Okay, Skull, don't be afraid. You and I will get off at the next station, and there they are waiting for us. They'll take you in and we'll go to the department to confess everything. I'm afraid, Commander, you won't like the next station as much as all the others. Why not? You wouldn't understand. We're in a different world. We don't have our stations here. Look out the window. There's an endless forest, eternal night and frost. It's just like that blabbermouth said, down to the last detail. I looked out the window. It's a forest without end. No communications, no people, and that conductor. You'd believe anything. Listen, Commander, I'm as hungry as a wolf, and according to the guy who sat here, there are bags of food in some of the cars. Let's go for a walk. Maybe we'll find something. Where would there be bags? I glanced at Pasha. I don't know, but that's what he said. I had to take off Skull's handcuffs, and we moved leisurely through the cars. Cherub walked in front. I followed him. The cars were different. Some were cleaner, others old and smelly. But everywhere it was half darkness and not a soul. Before leaving the next vestibule, Skull suddenly froze like a stump. What are you doing? I asked. Look. He nodded forward. In the half-dark carriage sat a man. After so many empty cars, this picture seemed to us simply mystical. Goosebumps crept up my body again. I put a new clip in the gun, and we slowly walked toward the dark figure of the passenger sitting with his back to us. He was just dozing, sitting by the window, his bag next to him. I nodded to Pasha to wake him up. He shook him by the shoulder. The passenger flinched and stared at us with sleepy eyes. Who are you, my dear? Asked Skull not loudly. I'm Leka, sounded back almost in a whisper. And who are you? Pasha. The Skull extended his hand to Leka. Victor. I introduced myself. Leka was overgrown and wrinkled. His age was hard to determine. How long have you been riding here, Leka? Skull started the conversation. A long time, I don't remember how long. I forgot the last time I saw people. Alexei, and when will be the next station? Sitting down next to me, I asked. It's impossible to predict when the train will stop. You must have recently arrived here, and you don't know much about this world. Yes, we are new here, but we have already met the conductor, so much so that we could hardly walk away. I confirmed. Leka, do you have anything to eat? Remembered about the essential Skull. Yes, of course. The new acquaintance fussed, pulling out rolls with supplies from his bag. The moon through the windows filled the space of the half-dark carriage with ghostly light. The strange company of 3 passengers was rushing in the empty train to some unknown destination. Everything that was happening seemed somehow not real and more like a nightmare. While Skull and I were satisfying our hunger, Alexei told us where we had gotten to, about the laws that reign in this dark world, about the mutants that live here, and about how he and Seryoga were looking for a portal and then he gave up. But when he began to tell about Uncle Zora, Skull got excited. "I know that story. He succeeded," he mumbled with a full mouth. "How did he manage?" Leka got excited. "I thought the conductor ate him." "No, he and his friend managed to get local tickets and the conductor set them free." The Skull continued in semi-Blatant lingo. "What's stopping us from going out? And what prevents us to go out at the station and buy tickets?" I suggested. "No, Commander, here our money is not quoted. Those two railroaders' ID card from the local goblin stole, on it tickets and took at the ticket office." Skull recalled a story from the zone. "Now I understand why it snowed here once," Alexei said thoughtfully. "Snow?" I asked. "The thing is that it never snows here, although it's always winter outside." Alexei began to explain. "But one day it suddenly snowed so much that all the windows were covered with snow. Apparently, when someone manages to get out of the train, there's some kind of malfunction in this world. You somehow manage to get in with two people, though the train used to let in one passenger only. Suddenly, everyone noticed the braking. It looks like there will be a station," Alexei reported. The speed began to drop, and the train slowly approached the night platform. A wall of dense and dark forest fenced off the night station like a huge fence. We gazed out the window. The moon illuminated the one-story station building with broken windows. The openings of the windows, like loopholes, gaped in the darkness. The atmosphere of abandonment could be felt on the skin. The carriage doors hissed open, and a sepulchral silence settled over the world. The view from the window was literally mesmerizing. And then we saw one of the locals, in a dirty and tattered orange vest, walking slowly along the platform from the tail of the train. He was literally dragging some metal tools in his incredibly long arms, and the sound of metal sliding on concrete made the hair on his head stand on end. "This is the local mechanic," whispered Leka. Pasha's mind instantly formed a plan. "Commander, this goblin is about to approach our window. Shoot him out of the barrel, and I'll jump out onto the platform and empty his pockets." Pasha also spoke in a whisper, and I nodded back. Clicking the safety on, I prepared myself. The sound of metal tools slowly approached us. Finally, the mutant's head showed through our window. I put a clip right through the glass. What happened next was such a nightmare that we were numb. The mechanic howled with such force that our legs became absorbent cotton. Then he began to break the glass through which I was shooting. Under the blows of his hammer, the glass showered us with splinters. We didn't know where to go. After kicking out the window, he climbed into our wagon. His wild scream and the sight of his bloody head paralyzed us. The next moment I saw how from behind the mechanic appeared another goblin. He was in a dirty white coat. On his head, the same color cap with a red cross. This medic put a huge syringe right into the mechanic's back, and in one fell swoop injected him with some kind of solution. The mechanic collapsed and passed out. The medic took him by the leg and slowly dragged him into the station building. A bloody trail stretched behind this horrible procession, and we stood dumbfounded looking at this scene. Holy shit! An ambulance! With horror in his eyes, said Skull. Something grunted indistinctly in the speakers. The car doors slammed shut with a clang and the train began to pick up speed. "Let's get out of here, or now it will be cold here without a window." Alexei came to his senses. We hurried to leave the wrecked carriage. A whole clip in his head, and he didn't care. Pasha lamented. "Commander, do you still have ammunition?" "Last clip," I muttered. Having overcome a few wagons, we found a bag with food and decided to make a break. "Where do these bags come from?" I turned to Alexei. "It is not known, maybe forgotten in the train. Things are somehow moved to this world. There are a lot of strange things happening here." "What happens if you leave the station and go into the car behind the conductor?" Sipping mineral water asked me. Beyond the conductor, the cars disappear at once, so he is always in the last car, and at stations he stands in the end vestibule and waits for the train to start. I see it's all worked out here. I was sad. I've been told that you can call the police. Skull intervened in the conversation. Yes, you can, if you press the emergency button and shout the phrase, "We have an emergency in the car," but it is better not to do it. Lekka got worried, because from the front vestibule, 2 such goblins will run out that you'll shit yourself. They'll grab the first one, and you won't see him again. He continued, "We must somehow break this black logic. We need to throw out some kind of trick, otherwise we will not get out of here." I reasoned. Sitting in the car, we tried to make a plan of action, which would help us to get tickets for the conductor and escape from this nightmarish world. Alexei told us in detail what monsters were here and on what principle they operated. From him we learned that if you try to make a fire, from the tail of the train will jump out a fireman, a huge mutant in a helmet and with a bugle. He first shoots down the flames with a fire extinguisher, and then chases the arsonists, and if he catches up, he will tear them apart. Skull suggested we take out a firefighter and a patrolman. After such a mess, someone will probably have a document, which we will use later. The difficulty is that the fireman and the patrol appear from different sides of the car, and if one of us gets between them, he is 100% dead. Therefore, the Operation Fire decided to do at the station when we can jump out on the platform and not get under the crush. According to our plan, as soon as we arrive at the station, we set fire to the car and run out on the platform. Skull calls the patrol and also Bullet jumps out into the street. And in order that this gathering of goblins would not be shy to show emotions, I should shoot at them a little from the street, through the window, in order to provoke a good fight in their company. Having approved the plan, we began to tear off the upholstery from the seats and pile up everything that could burn. Lekka had a small bottle of acetone, which he had once found in one of his bags. After everything was ready, we decided to rest while waiting for the station. Skull dozed off, and I was seized by some excitement. Lekka with acetone and a lighter sat on a bench next to a pile of rags. After a while, the train began to slow down. I woke up Cherub, and here, at last, the station. We scrutinized the night platform. There were no buildings on it, only a couple of benches and one dim lantern. Behind it, the forest was dark and frosty. "Light it." I nodded to Alexei and went outside. Lekka poured acetone on the pile and held a lighter. The pile burst into flames and he ran out into the cold. It was down to the skull. Now he's got to call the posse and come running out to us. I already had my gun ready, but things didn't go according to plan. From the street, we heard the skull yelling, "There's an emergency in the train car," and then he slowed down. A patrol of 2 mutants instantly burst into the train car. One big, the other smaller, all of them scarred. Skull darted away from them toward the second vestibule, hoping to jump out through it. The 2 men roared after him, and when he was already running to the other end of the car, a fireman jumped out to meet him. Alexei had seen these monsters before, but I saw them for the first time. A fire was blazing in the carriage, illuminating everything going on inside. Skull jumped over the burning pile and immediately fell into the fireman's paws. The mutant instantly bit his head off and threw the body to the floor. With a jet from a huge fire extinguisher, he knocked down the flames and hit the patrol. That's where the mess started. I didn't even have to shoot. These 2 guys came at the fireman with a wild roar. Me and Liha, numb with fear, stood on the platform, and right in front of us jumped car, in which 3 monsters were tearing each other apart. The silence of this dark world was exploding with wild roars and screams. Glasses were blown out into the street like cannons. It made our hair stand on end. When I was completely deafened by the noise, Lekka grabbed my hand and dragged me to the next car. He did it just in time. As soon as we jumped inside, the doors slammed shut and the train started moving. If we hadn't made it in time, we would have stayed on the platform, and that would have been certain death. After running a couple of cars, Alexei stopped. By then, the carnage behind us had died down. "We must get back to that carriage," he said fearfully. I nodded reluctantly, took out my pistol, and we slowly went to look around the battlefield. Leka, as an experienced man, walked ahead. He carefully opened the door from the vestibule into the passage between the cars. There was interrupted by a trail of blood that led to the wagon where we had set the fire. A patrol with its victim always disappears between cars. Leha whispered to me. When we entered the car, what we saw sent shivers down our spine. Almost all the windows were broken, smoldering rags were scattered everywhere. The walls and ceiling were splattered with blood. In the semi-darkness of the train car, Skull's decapitated body lay on the floor. A firefighter's helmet rolled nearby, along with his severed head. Shards of glass crunched underfoot. I slowly approached Skull's remains. There was paper money lying around the fireman's head. The train began to pick up speed and the bills, rustling, tried to fly away from me. I collected as much as I could. At that moment, a conductor started to squeeze into the car, and Leka and I ran away. After running a few carriages, I took out the bills. They were local, some cartoonish, but it was definitely money. Must have fallen out of a fireman's pocket. Dash, looks like we'll be able to buy tickets, I said, looking at Lek. Let's get away from the conductor and have a rest, because I'm getting heart palpitations from all this. Leka wheezed. Having passed 5 or 6 carriages, we found another bag with provisions and sat down to rest. A cup and a half of water, sausage, and boiled eggs strengthened us at that moment. Leka was tired, and I was also pecking my nose waiting for the next station. I don't know how much time passed, but the train jerked sharply and Leka and I woke up. The train was slowing down. We were approaching the station. A shabby building with broken windows, a bench and a couple of dim lights. Everything as it should be in this deserted world. The electric train stopped and opened its doors. I looked around the empty platform and stepped into the frosty darkness. Approaching the only glazed window of the ticket office, I threw all the bills into the tray and slid it into the bowels of the concrete structure. "2 tickets," I said, pointing 2 fingers through the murky window. There was a sepulchral silence in the cashier's office, and time passed more slowly than ever. I tapped my finger on the glass. No reaction. Alexei was watching from the vestibule and worried that I would not have time to jump into the car when the train started. He was already waving at me to go back. Suddenly, the tray was shoved outward. I jumped up in surprise. In the tray were 2 cardboard tickets and a couple of bills of change. Grabbing everything, I ran to the carriage. When Alexei took the tickets in his hands, he was overcome with some excitement. "Will we really be able to get out of here?" he said. Skull said that we just have to show these tickets to the conductor and we'll get into our dimension. I confirmed. The speaker gave out a loud but incomprehensible message, and the train, having closed the doors, continued its way through the expanses of the parallel world. Some time passed, and the conductor reached our carriage. Having squeezed through the doors of the vestibule, he began to methodically feel the space in front of him. Since he was blind, he moved slowly. His huge hands fumbled in every nook and cranny of the carriage, and woe betide anyone he caught without a ticket. The mutant's incoherent muttering filled the space with a kind of tension that made him want to run away. It cost us a huge effort of will to let this monster near us and hand him cardboard tickets. Having checked their authenticity by some mysterious device, he returned the punched tickets to us and continued his endless way, leaving us behind in an empty carriage. "What next?" whispered Leka when the conductor left our car. "We just need to move to another car," I answered quietly, remembering Skull's story. When in the next carriage we saw people, Leka grabbed his heart. His excitement passed to me. "I didn't hope that I would ever get out," he said in a shaky voice. At that moment, the speakers blared. "Platform 666 kilometer. Next station, Liski." We had never been so happy to hear announcements on the trains.